Great, thank you, everyone. Our next activity, and it's going to be an activity, we're all going to get to work, is going to be led by Sharon Frattaroli, Dr. Shannon. And I got the last name right. We're working on her last name, and I blow the first name. By Grace Smith, I'm just kidding. Shannon Frattaroli. Dr. Frattaroli is Associate Professor of Health Policy and Management at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where she serves as the Associate Director for Outreach of the Center of Injury Research and Policy. The good doctor teaches courses in public health policy, formulation, and implementation research and practice. Her research focus is on policy and advocacy strategies designed to prevent injury, with a particular focus on how interventions are implemented. Most of Dr. Frattaroli's projects focus on preventing injuries related to residential fires, other home injuries, and gun violence, particularly firearm-related domestic violence. The doctor is committed to work that advances the translation of findings into policy and practice. She has published widely on the use of qualitative methods in injury prevention, as well as on science and the practice of translating injury prevention interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shannon Frattaroli.
Well, I wanted to start off by just thanking everyone for their participation today. This has just been a fantastic day. So let's give ourselves a hand. So my charge here is a rather ominous one. I was asked to kind of wrap up, review what we've done, and set us on a course where we can identify an agenda to move forward from this great day together, move forward with a plan for addressing a lot of the challenges that we see in our communities with regard to smoke alarms, and realizing a vision for a safer, fire death-free world. So what I'd like to start off with is just by sort of reminding us that fire, death, and injury is really a problem that we know how to solve. Right? This is really something that's within our reach. We've heard today about some of the challenges we have with data and understanding the fire death problem. We've heard about some of the challenges that we have and sort of the vision for technology, the challenges associated with some of the human behavior aspects of this. But within those discussions have also been a lot of solutions, right? So we can envision better technologies. We can envision more sensitive technologies that aren't as prone to going off when cooking fires happen. But we have good technology now. Human behavior is a condition that is always challenging and that we always need to find ways to improve. But, by and large, if we sort of look at the majority of the population, most people do have working smoke alarms in their homes, right? So it's not that human behavior has completely rejected fire safety. So we have a lot to work with, and we have a lot of ideas to move forward. So what really is our challenge with regard to smoke alarms and improving the condition of fire safety in this country? Again, I would submit that it's not necessarily a problem that has to do with technology. It's not necessarily a problem that has to do with data or human behavior. Again, there are things that we can fix around the edges there. It's not a problem of political will. I mean, I look around this room and we've got incredible will within this room to address this problem. People have been working for decades to reduce, to eliminate fire deaths and serious injuries in this country. So what is it that we need to move forward? Well, I would like to submit that what we need in order to make some meaningful gains in this area is a plan that we can all get behind, a plan that will get us to 0 deaths, 0 serious injuries with regard to fire deaths in this country. And so what do we need to do to get there? Well, today was, I think from the perspective of the planners, the first step in getting us there. We started off with Marty talking with us about the state of the data. What do we know about fire deaths and injuries in this country? What do we need to know in order to understand this problem better? And listening to Marty, I think we all understood that data is really a very important tool for informing our path forward. But we need to make sure that we're engaged with the data, right? It's not something that we can just be passive about. We can't just sort of let it be collected and let it do its magic. We have to assure that we're asking the right questions. We have to assure that we're collecting accurate and quality information. And we have to assure that we're analyzing it in a way and providing information in a way that people can act on it. In listening to Marty, she pointed out a number of challenges that we have, both with regard to the users who collect and analyze the data, as well as some wider systems issues. So we heard a lot about some of the challenges with regard to the completeness of some fields. Boy, like some of the fields that she showed were upwards of 90% of having missing variables in those fields. That's just not going to be a useful data system if we're not collecting 90% of the variables that we need. We also heard about more sort of system-wide challenges. So, boy, the need for a census of where we are in this country with regard to smoke alarms in homes. I think it's been decades since we've done that at a national level. And I think Marty called for a task force to figure out how we can look toward the next generation of NFIRS, and perhaps we also need a task force to understand how we can get an accurate count of what exactly is in the homes of people in this country. We heard a lot in that discussion about data, about how we need to know more about sort of the behaviors that lead to fire risks, as well as the behaviors in response to fires. So, some concerns about what impacts are nuisance alarms having on how people respond to alarms. And are we seeing slower reactions because people are questioning if that alarm, which might be the real one, is in fact just someone burning something downstairs? So those are important elements that aren't currently being examined in our data collection systems that can really inform a path going forward. And there was a lot of great discussion about how our data systems can be better. And again, looking at the next iteration of NFIRS, that discussion was extremely valuable in terms of how we can look forward. I was also really pulled into the discussion about disabilities and the need to better understand sort of the risks that people with disabilities face when it comes to fire, both sensory and physical disabilities, and in some of the elevated risks that we saw demonstrated in the data. This is particularly important, I would say, in this day and age when physical disability not only includes some of the traditional ways that we've thought about physical disability, but also disability in terms of our growing obesity epidemic and the challenges with regard to mobility in our population, the challenges that with regard to mobility as people age as well. So disability is another area where I would encourage us to continue to think about how we can improve our data systems in order to best address that challenge. We heard today as well about a lot of great information about the behavior side of the equation. So Zach talked to us about some great messaging work that Salter Mitchell has been doing, some wonderful insight into how we can better communicate the importance of smoke alarms and the potential of smoke alarms to really make our lives and our homes and our families safer. Phil and Elise provided some, what I thought of a very sobering data from the field about the significant level of misunderstanding that people have with regard to how smoke alarms work and what the messages that smoke alarms are sending out. What does that chirping mean? We all know in this room what it means, but to hear from people in our communities that chirping is a sign that it's working is a real eye-opener and provides some very important insight into that interaction between technology and the people that technology is serving. We heard at lunch from our federal partners, and it's really wonderful to have such a great agency behind prevention in this country. And I was particularly moved by Maggie's remarks, not just in terms of her commitment to assuring good, solid, fair oversight and administration of our federal resources, but also her willingness and the office's willingness to really fight for prevention in a meaningful way. And we need to be supportive of their willingness to do that, to fight that good fight with our appropriators, and be sure to send those good stories of success that come from those funding dollars her way. After lunch, I thought we had a great overview from LJ about the policy infrastructure that's in place that helps us figure out how to oversee smoke alarms in this country with NFPA 72. I've been one, I like to think of myself as a policy person, but I've always been sort of perplexed and confused by the coding system, and that was just a nice sort of succinct and very clear explanation of how NFPA 72 works. So it's a great start, I think, for our technology discussion. And I really appreciated the insight into sort of the cutting-edge laboratory work that's going on from Tom, Amanda, and Richard, and to just get an appreciation for where we can go with technology and how careful and thoughtful our lab scientists, our partners in that realm, are being with regard to looking ahead to more effective, user-friendly technologies in the smoke alarm arena. And then I really appreciated Larry's comments about the importance of considering how we can make smoke alarms work for people and not sort of always go to the how can we make people work with technology. Technology has just evolved in a number of areas in the past 10, 20 years. And so it's really easy to imagine how we can be thinking differently about technology and how we can be thinking about technology that works well with humans in a very different way that can have tremendous impacts on where we want to get with regard to smoke alarms in this country. So that's where we've been, and I wanted to add one additional frame as we move into this next phase, this last phase of our day together, but not the last phase of our time together. And that is to really encourage us when we think about fire deaths in this country and serious fire injuries, is to really set as a goal to aim for zero. There really is no reason why people in the 21st century in this country should be dying from fires. There really isn't. And I'm wondering, one of my favorite sort of programs these days is a program out of Sweden called Vision Zero that is focused on auto safety and focused on a goal of reducing deaths from auto crashes to zero. Are people familiar with that Swedish program? There seems some yes, some no. Well, Vision Zero, again, it's out of Sweden. It's been replicated in a number of countries around the world. And the basic idea very much follows on to what Larry ended the technology panel with. And the basic idea is that, with Vision Zero, they say, car crashes are going to happen. Car crashes are going to happen, but people don't have to die as a result of a car crash. People don't have to die, and people don't actually have to be seriously injured either. And what they have done in Sweden, and again other places that have replicated this model, is to say, if someone dies in a car crash, we need to consider that a failure of the system. Not a failure of the driver, not a failure of the pedestrian, but a failure of the system, because as road safety engineers, we need to design a system. We are committed to designing a system in which people don't die on the road. So let's just think for a moment if we kind of adopt that model for fire in this country. So what if we say, fires are going to happen. We're not at a place right now, I don't think, where we can really talk about eliminating fires, residential fires, as a risk yet. But what if we say fires are going to happen, but we are not going to accept that people are going to die or even be seriously injured in those fires? And what if, when we looked at the data that Marty showed us, we didn't just seek to understand sort of what led to the fire, but we sought to really challenge ourselves to say that the fire death represents a failure. And where did we fail in our system, and how can we change our system so that a death doesn't happen under those circumstances again? And again, I think this follows on very nicely to Larry's comment about the importance of thinking about how we can engineer our systems, engineer our technologies so that they take into account the human condition. As much as we try, we're always going to make mistakes. As much as that's just sort of the nature of sort of human beings. But is there a way, can we be thinking about ways to make sure that our systems, our technologies, don't allow those mistakes to be fatal? Don't allow those mistakes to lead to serious injury? And I think there is. So as we sort of move forward into this next phase, which is going to involve you getting to know your table mates a bit better, I'd encourage you to think about all the wonderful information that was presented, the challenges that were presented with regard to data, the wonderful information, the discussion we had about human behavior and how we need to move forward with advancing that part of the solution, and the great discussion around technology and how those all interact, but also think about how we can account for the fact that people are going to make mistakes. But we don't, in the end, want people to die of fires. And are there ways that we can engineer our way out of this problem and get to a place where we have 0 deaths in this country from residential fires? I think we can, and I think this group is the group to do it. So that's your charge. Specifically, if you look on your agenda, what we're asking you to do for the next 30 minutes is to consider all the information that's been presented before you today and think carefully about what that plan looks like. You know, if you'll sort of give me a little bit of, if you'll go along with me a little bit and believe that what we need more than anything really is the plan that we can agree upon with regard to how to combine the data and what we know about human behavior and what we know about technology in order to improve the smoke alarm situation in this country and reduce fire deaths and injuries to 0, then what we're charging you to do now is to come up with that plan. And we'd like you to think about short and medium and long-term strategies for addressing the smoke alarm challenges that we've identified. And some of the areas that we'd like you to consider are obviously the areas that we've thought about today. So what do our plans need to take into account with regard to improving what we know about data? How do we need to move forward with regard to addressing the challenges associated with human behavior? How do we need to move forward with regard to the technology questions that were raised? And I would also put out there that we should also be thinking about policy and enforcement and how we can use those tools in order to move us forward in the days and weeks and years moving forward. So some specific instructions: you're going to have a half hour, tons of time, to solve this problem, to come up with your plan, and then we have a half hour devoted to presenting these plans. So one of the first things I'll ask you to do in your groups is to identify someone who is going to be willing to come up to the podium and report out to the group. And yes, you have to come up to the podium because the AV folks say that it'll make for much better video, which is so important these days. So identify a person who will be your reporter. Spend a half hour talking about this little charge that we've given to you. We'll hear from you. And that will be our charge to move forward in the days and weeks and years ahead. My final comment is that the yellow index cards on the table, you might be wondering what those are all for. If there are any sort of burning issues, no pun intended, that you weren't able to raise and that you feel are very important and want to make sure that the organizers of this event take into consideration, please just write them down on those yellow cards, and we'll collect them and be sure to read them and do very important things with them. All right, so identify your recorder, figure out a solution, and we'll check back in with you in a half hour.